Before we get into this podcast episode, I want to start off by premising you should never feel bad for not knowing your history, right? When you know your history, you have to understand that it has been intentionally designed, right, for you not to know your history. So when we say things, or when I say things, especially as I get into this podcast episode and I'm like, learn, educate, even as I've said things prior, like on this podcast, understand that like, this is just the journey. Like this, we're just now on the road, right? So please do not feel ashamed for not knowing certain things. Don't feel ashamed for not reading certain books or starting your bookshelf just yet. Don't feel ashamed. Like there's so much that it was intended for you not to know. So we have a lot to learn, but it's collective and we're here together. And this is why we create, to share the things that we know, because it's been intentionally kept from us. So how can you feel guilty for not knowing certain things, or feel inadequate or incompetent for not knowing certain things when it was intended for you not to know? I continue to grow and learn. There are going to be certain arguments that change, like certain ideas about whether or not Black athletes and entertainers contribute to Black communities, especially when you realize that so much of the groundwork is hidden. It's without acknowledgement. And so much of our media really premises on white institutions. And so if they don't get the coverage, then it's almost like the work never happened. And we know that if it didn't get posted on social media, it didn't happen. But at the same time, we know you walk a very fine line of posting everything on social media, all of your good deeds, and being considered fake. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, we are just going to be talking about Black giftedness. I talked about this in a previous podcast episode, but generally speaking, you guys know that when it comes to being Black, when it comes to being gifted, right? I spoke about how for Black people can't be gifted, godly, or genius, right? Whenever Blacks rise to the occasion, right? Whenever we supersede those who are around us, right? White people, or even, other people as well. Not only is it a lack of acknowledgement, right? When you even think about just American society and just the ways in which the representation really does shift to always prioritize the intelligence or the glamorization of intelligence within immigrants and whites, right? When it comes to Blacks, like I just seen there were some black kids. It was a young Black girl. She was like one of the best in the national spelling bee. And there's been so many other Black kids I've been following that are on this Instagram page, I think it's called Black Wealth, who have, really superseded like in so many ways, and they have done amazing things, right? You even think about gymnastics, the Olympics, and so forth, but that oftentimes does not meet headlines in terms of white institutions, right? That doesn't meet the headlines. I think we just now got to a point where it's like low key. I think Good Morning America is kind of like, showcasing certain things, but a lot of times it doesn't make the news. And so you think that we don't exist there, and I'm just sitting here thinking about this, and it's like, it's something that really, I think I'm more so coming on to encourage you to understand that like, it's not you. It's not that you're not capable. It's not that you're not intelligent, right? A lot of times because of the hate, right? I love the movie, The Hate That You Give, because I think the title in itself is very telling, right? When you talk about white America, there is a deeply, deeply, deeply profound ingrained sense of hate in regards to Black people. There's really nothing else to justify the level of work, and even still to this day, the continuation of dismissal, of our intelligence, of our gifts, of, our godliness, especially as it pertains to gospel. I wrote about this, whitewashing the gospel, the rise of mega churches, and how these churches were making millions and millions of dollars, at this point, billions of dollars, right? Looking into the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church has billions of dollars, right? There's, literally a bank after the Catholic Church, there's like fine artwork, and it's just like billions of dollars all based on, and it's like, here you are, and you're Catholic, and you're coming to church, and you're praying, and you're poor. Like, it's crazy. And it's not to say, right, because I don't want to say that with crassness, right? I don't mean to be crass when I say that, but I'm more so mean to say that I say that to say that there's so much there that is unexplored, and that is slightly concerning. So not to get into the Catholics, but there's a lot there, right? We know that gospel, a lot of times the origination is of blacks, right? Like black people didn't have anything outside of the gospel. Okay. And we're not necessarily referencing Desmond Tutu, right? But we're talking about blacks being in America, having the gospel, that being the only thing that we have is faith, right? That being the only thing that seemingly carries, our ancestors through, right? Because there was nothing else to really justify what white people were doing, right? Even still to this day, there's really nothing to justify the hate that white people have and the hate that white people give towards African Americans. And I was sitting here thinking, because here I am in this space as a writer, as a teacher, scholar, intellect, and so forth, and just how I'm in this space and I'm gifted and I'm like, wow, that is something that is always going to be undermined. And so I think you have to be very careful when you walk this line of like humility and you walk this line of like being humble, especially as it pertains to white America, white institutions, and being in certain spaces. Even if you are just the only black, or even if, you're the first gen, whatever the case may be, you have to be very careful with walking that line, because a lot of times it's just so deeply ingrained in white people to, discredit you. You know what I mean? We don't really get the opportunity, again, I say this, to be gifted, genius, or godly, right? Like we don't get the opportunity to reign in the realms of philosophy, right? A lot of times we talk about thoughts and ideas and paradigms and intellects, right? Thought leaders and so forth. I can't even say thought leaders, because I think thought leader is secondary, right? When you look at, obviously we know white men benefit the most, so we're not going to entirely compare, to, and we, age, and there's other considerable factors, right? But we're not going to entirely compare or, standardize, but it's like when you look at the similarities, right, between a black person who's considered, okay, this is a thought leader, right? And a lot of times when it comes to black education and black intellects, our beliefs, our intelligence is really, it's always undermined. It's always shortchanged. It's never really seen in all the fullness and the glory and the ingenuity that really takes, that goes into taking the time to read and, learn and so forth. Like that's always discredited, whether it's, like Kanye West, in terms of weaponizing his mental health, you know what I mean? But Van Gogh was seen as a genius, you know what I mean? But we always have the reference of Albert Einstein, you know what I mean? Like all these different things, but it's like Kanye West is seen as, oh, he's just mentally ill. And I have a problem with this, not because I'm a Kanye stan. I'm not even really a Kanye West fan. I wouldn't even say that. I think for me, I recognize when we have a legend within the community. And yes, what Kanye West has done is legendary and it's very revolutionary in the sense of his creativity, right? I do believe in separating the art from the artist. I do believe in taking a step back and realizing the significance that Kanye West has on this world, right? Kanye West has completely revolutionized the way that we see design, right? And people don't realize that because he's still alive. People don't realize that because a lot of times when it comes to black scholars, black intellect, and us, researchers being in this space, it's underfunded, it's under-researched, and there's not really a lot of African Americans in this space because, quite frankly, from a historical perspective, it's not that we weren't capable, but a lot of us were really discouraged from walking into these institutions. And I really challenged so many black people to really sit and think about this, right? I wrote this piece about conservatives, and I talked about how, Clarence Thomas' decision to overrule affirmative action. And I just posed the question, and I'm not necessarily based it on Clarence Thomas, but questioning whether or not this could be seen as a means of protection. We know that when you're the only black person in the room, right, you're coming from these communities where obviously there's deprivation, and that's intentional, right? We know that was intentional, but it's like you're coming from these communities, you're the only one, you're the first gen, you're on scholarships, you know what I mean? And you're in these rooms and you're like 16, 17, 15 years old. What that does to a child, right? The story of Ruby Bridges is not something that is, this is the thing too, right? I think a lot of times when we talk about Black history, it's always seen as history in terms of past tense, previous context, means of reference, when we don't realize that this is happening today, right? The things that are going on today, like it's today. And I think even for myself being in the work of activism, I'm continuously learning and experiencing, but I really have to sit back and realize, listen, this isn't Black history. This isn't just, okay, yeah, we're referencing these textbooks and we're taking context from the things that have happened in the past. past. No, this is happening today. These are things that are going on today, right? Because of the diversification in regards to Black America and our identity, right? We're African. We're all, you know what I mean? We're all over the place. We're busy fighting for other countries, and we're always the ones who are on the front lines for everybody else and their injustice. We're standing alongside immigrants. We're doing all these different things. Our momentum has been completely swayed, right? And the thing that really bothers me when we have these conversations is that we don't even sit and think about why is it that Black people always have to be the ones to advocate on behalf of everybody, right? I think that there is something about our, the confusion, right? Or the misconstruction of taking what we've gone through and seeing the good in it, seeing the beauty in it, and that's continuous, right? But it's lost on us when we don't stop and realize, like, hey, wait a minute. When you start talking about carrying everybody on your back, that's not necessarily a noble thing, right? This extra mile that we go for other people, this is not a noble thing. It's not noble to constantly be in a state of servitude to other people who don't serve you, to other people who won't pay you any attention, to other people who look past you. Asians are not forced to learn about African American history. White people want to turn a blind eye continuously. And this is why, I really do have a problem with, and it's not even just me, right? I'm not going to keep saying like, it's just me. No, this is collective, right? This is all across the border. When you start talking about cultural appropriation, right? It's problematic in the sense that, first of all, it's problematic, period. Let me not even, you know what I mean? Let's not, seriously. But it's like white people come and really play in Black culture. Like, it's fun. It's fun right now for you to have your Black boyfriend and you to do what you do. And you know what I mean? You to have your Black babies and so forth. But it's like when you're tired of being in that space, this is why, you talk about interracial dating. And, we can pose the question, okay, self-esteem and, Black women being in certain spaces and, teen pregnancy. We can pose those questions, but we can also look at the realism and see too, like, this is why for a lot of white women, it's like, we're going to go and we're going to get the best of the best. You know what I mean? And so it's like you constantly want to take from the Black community. You constantly want to, indulge yourself in the pleasures of like the creativity and all these different things. But when it gets hard, when the going gets tough, when it's time to really deal with the issues at hand in terms of Blackness and the experience of being a Black American, right? This very peculiar experience, you're out of the game. And I don't really mean to reference celebrities because I just feel like it's so cringe, but because we know that we live in a society where celebrities are, this nation was built on the backs of, celebrityism, entertainment, and making them our idols, right? We do have to look at Kim Kardashian as a reference, and we have to reference her and say, Kanye West has completely revolutionized and has given so much creativity to this family that they were really able to capitalize. And when you take a look at this simplistic branding, this very simple concept that has yielded many white brands, right? Many people across America in general, like everybody has this aesthetic, and that is Kanye West. And so you can't go anywhere without really acknowledging Blackness and its giftedness and its genius, you know what I mean? And the ingenuity, but at the same time, we're always discredited. We're always shortchanged, and very seldom, which is almost never, are we acknowledged for it. And that is problematic to me. And this is very dangerous. And then you start talking about low self-esteem and you talk about underachievement. Well, you have to understand where that comes from. And so I'm more so making this podcast to, educate African Americans, like Blacks, y'all got to know. Y'all know, we're here together and this is what it's about. But it's like, you have to understand what is taking place, especially today, because at this point, it's a battle of ideas, right? We have to be in certain spaces to advocate on behalf of ourselves. We have to create things to educate our communities. You know what I mean? We have to say, no, I'm not going to succumb to that. I'm better than that. I know that's not true. You know what I mean? We have to be the ones who are advocating on our behalf because nobody else is doing it, right? Like I said, Asians aren't forced to learn about African American history. Nobody else is pressing about our community. No one else is pressing about our education. But yet here we are on the front lines for everything that takes place in the world. You know what I mean? We feel the need to go and advocate. And I think that that's really because we really want to dabble in certain things. We want to be kind of like the free spirited white man who goes up on the mountains, in the Cuyahoga River, you know what I mean? On the summer and takes shrooms and, sleeps with his best friend. And we want to do all that. So it's like, we feel like we have to, our interests, our everything is so diversified. What took place with Claudine Gay was exactly everything I'm talking about. In terms of Ruby Bridges, this isn't history. This is now. This is not history. This is now. Okay. And the thing about empowerment, especially in terms of African Americans, it was always this belief in the minds of whites that reigned, that was, if Black people are empowered, oh my God, what is going to happen if Black people are empowered, right? Because of what we've done to them, what we continuously do to them, what is going to happen if Black people are empowered? So they always really lived with this fear because of the hate that they give. And, I do think there obviously are spiritual principles, right? And so I think that for a lot of whites, they really live with this constant perpetual state of fear of like, oh my God, what are we going to do if these people wake up? And their fear was, in their limited perspective, the consequences of that would be we would go and kill them and do all the things. But we clearly have seen that has never happened. And I believe that white people and Black people have a completely different culture. It's not the same, inherently, right? We can look at the numbers. You can look at just all across the field. White men are some of the most vicious, ferocious, careless and violent individuals, right? You don't see that within African Americans. But because, again, you start talking about research and psychology and so many other things, right? Black people are left out of this space, right? We're not in the rooms. We're not, we're not ones who are being studied in that sense, right? Like there's so much missing context there. There's a lot of missing representation. So what you have is just fear and a lot of lies and like false ideas perpetuating the space, and we start talking about African American history. I can't stress this enough, how mind boggling it is, that we literally are in a space now where it's like it's book banning, right? But this is why I say too, like it's not history, it's current, right? We were denied the ability to read and write. We were literally lynched, murdered, and so forth for our ability, our decision, or desire rather, to just read and write. So here we are today. Fast forward, and Rosa Parks is being banned from schools. So it's just like when you look at that, that's crazy. Like, isn't that like mind blowing? When you look at, you think about our history, the work that we have to go in to find the books, and it's really only in the books, right? And even still, we have to sit with ideas. We have to critically assess, okay, who's telling this story, right? Is this story something that's being romanticized, right? We know that that's continuous. And so it's like, there's so much there that is happening, especially within the realm of like psychology, but it plays a really huge role. And I have a problem with this with a lot of people. Y'all know I say this all the time. Listen, Jesus cares about justice. Now, y'all ain't going to sit here and Jesus cares about justice, So I just think we start talking about like the realism of that. You start talking about representation. You start talking about how so much of our existence has been made minute, right? This is the tactics of whites, right? They'll go and they'll take this one thing and then they'll tear everything else down. You know what I mean? And they'll play on the representation. They'll go above and beyond to ruin, right? And I don't think that this is solely something that takes place against Blacks, right? I was looking at a film on Netflix. I believe it was based on a true story. I loved it. It was really good, actually. It was called Beautiful Mind, right? And just kind of seeing some similarities, right, that take place in a society where you are gifted, right? Giftedness being that there's something about you, you're innate, you're special. It could be genetics. We don't necessarily know where it comes from, although in part, sometimes it is genetics and it could possibly be hereditary. We know that gifts come from God, right? There's really no science to explain the supernatural ability that some people have, right? I know we rag on entertainers and athletes, but you start talking about the gift of agility, right? How does he know to catch the ball and flip you know what I mean? Sure, you could talk about practice, but there are a lot of guys who practice who will never be at his level. You know what I mean? So there's giftedness in us, in that we know that giftedness comes from God, but a lot of times that is something that is completely lost on us, right? When we have standards, especially in terms of education and intelligence, that model after Europeans, we have a limited perspective. We have a limited spectrum. We have a limited range of intelligence. And we also have representation that insists that, hey, only whites are intelligent, right? Only white. And this is why, too, I've had so many experiences with white Americans and their frustration when they're not right about something, right? It's almost like this sense of arrogance that oozes and persists. And there's a frustration that shortly follows. And a lot of times that can be something that turns violent, right? Because in their minds, it's like, wow, who are you to tell me that I am not intelligent? And quite frankly, not only is it like arrested development, but it's scary, right? It's literally scary to be in a space where it's like, one, you're immature, right? You're underdeveloped, and you live this very narrow life to where it's like, if anyone says anything else, you're ready to take a life. That is scary. And so you start talking about the years and even continuously, right? The siloing of Black voices, our inability to stand for ourselves, to advocate on behalf of ourselves, right? Look at historically everything that has happened with our Black leaders, everything that has happened, you know what I mean? Literally assassinated, right? Completely murdered. It wasn't, it wasn't anything that, lynch mobs, right? Like you start talking about that. You start talking about modern day assassination, right? Reputation destruction, right? You start talking about the bullying and the things that take place on the back end, death threats, all these different things. Like it's continuous, right? White culture has a consistent, a consistent need, I guess you could say, for violence and enacting violence whenever there's a deviance to their ideals or a deviance to the things that they've been taught about themselves. And it's crazy to me, and so there's so much context there. There's so much history, and there's so much so many things taking place today, right? Black people being alive is really remarkable, quite frankly. The extents that we've, the things that we have endured, the extents that, institutions and, have gone to today and continuously to pretty much like dispel us, it's really like mind blowing, quite frankly. So I just think that, there's a lot there. There really is. And I think as much as we like to be like, oh, it's Black History Month, even still there's little acknowledgement. You just have to really look up and realize like, oh my God, we have literally been deprived of our ability to learn about ourselves. And when we talk about education being a privilege, we're not talking solely about the thousands of dollars that you need to even go to college and, endure the turmoil, the scrutiny, the bullying, the harassment from white individuals from being the only Black in certain spaces, and not because other Blacks aren't competent, but because of the resources, right? And outside of the financial means and the financial resources, again, the scrutiny is continuous, right? Ruby Bridges was, the first, we were able to see that, but it's continuous, right? You're in the room, you have ideas, you're expressing yourself. Not only do you have your white peers who are, being disrespectful and, you didn't have your professors who are a lot of times challenging you as well. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, I'm spending thousands of dollars to be treated like what? Just to get a piece of paper to be validated in certain spaces. But guess what? We still do it, and we do it continuously, and we do it well. And we're still doing it, and I'm not saying that in a sense of like, why are we still doing it? I'm saying that in the sense of looking at our persistence in this country and never getting the credit that is due, and I don't really think it's credit at this point, because quite frankly, I don't necessarily think acknowledgement is the thing, the driving force that's gonna, because again, at this point, you have to understand we're up against ideas, right? Ideas in terms of like how we see ourselves, how we see the world, psychology, right? That's the most permanent thing. Like, quite frankly, yeah, and now spirituality too, right? So it's like you've attacked the psychology, right? You're attacking the mind of a person, mind, will, emotions, right? And now you're looking into the spirituality, right? The whitewashing of the gospel. This is getting scary. And I just think that this isn't to say, hey, this is alarming, get up and do, but it's to say, listen, get busy with the books, seriously, because you're not going to find it anywhere else. And just understand that when you are a person who's been on this earth 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 15 years, 10 years, 50, whatever, and you have no reference point to who you are and what your culture has done and what your history is and what is happening present day, there is going to be a lot of cognitive dissonance in terms of your self-esteem, what you believe you're capable of and what you're actually, achieving. You're not going to understand why certain things are the way they are. You're not going to understand why you're at work, right? A young woman, myself, right? Being a young woman, being at work, 15, and I'm experiencing discrimination, I'm experiencing racism, you're not going to have an understanding of that. You're not going to know what is going on. So you're going to eventually turn on yourself and turn inward, right? And it's going to start to really erode and disrupt your self-esteem. So it's like, you have to really be aware. Like, I remember I went to a vision board party not too long ago. And there were some little tools, little knickknacks, right? No, not tools, but knickknacks for my vision board. And I was talking to this white woman who was standing by the thing. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that is an adhesive, right? That's an adhesive. She's like, no, it's not. You have to like take it and put it, like on a, you know what I mean? Like just really kind of like rebuttaling. And I'm like, no, look, I think this is an adhesive, like, and she's like, no, like, I think you have to take it and you have to put, and it ultimately ended up being an adhesive. But this really spoke to why it is that white people feel like they can lord over and feel like their way is the only right way. And I think it's very simple-minded and it's very narrow-minded, especially in terms of, Western institutions, right? White institution, white psychology, to be like, well, that's just an individual one-to-one. And you have to understand too, that's it's easily digestible, right? It doesn't really require a lot of critical thinking. But you also have to understand too, when you're within the structure of white supremacy, right? When you're the benefactor of white privilege, you don't even do studies on yourself to see why do we do what we do. You know what I mean? Your psychology, your way of life, your way of being, and your history is, and even present time, right? It's not anything that is ever studied. Who questions white supremacy? Who actually takes the time to study it? And obviously not in a general sense in terms of, recognizing white supremacy and the structure in itself, but more so talking about if you take the example, right, just to simplify it, Black culture has always been under the lens of, the government. It's been under the lens of the FBI. It's been under the lens of white America, right? White psychologists and so forth. And in terms of referencing as a means of like control. But for white people, when you are at the head of the hierarchy, right, there's no one to question, right, why you do what you do. You have no one to challenge you in that space. And when you go to such extents to murder, to cover up the history, and to really, demolish Black institutions, Black structures, Black psychology, and so forth, then you have no one to really challenge that, right? I spoke about this, and I look forward to doing a little bit more research regarding it. But when you think about immigrants, right, what is the representation that immigrants have of America? To me, it sounds like immigrants are seeing something completely different. I believe that they're seeing the land of the free, the home of the brave. They're seeing something completely different. And we know that there's trade-offs, right? We know that America, we have material comfort. We have convenience, right? We know in third world countries, they don't have that, right? We know that there's oftentimes a spiritual and psychological piece, but hey, if you want certain resources, you probably should, so we get that, right? But what I've found when I look at immigrants, most immigrants who come here, they're typically chasing the American dream. And it makes me wonder, what is the propaganda? What is the marketing that is sold to immigrants, right? Not just in terms of Black life and Black people, but American society in general. It really seems as though immigrants oftentimes come to America with a different idea, about what America is. And I think that because there are certain tax benefits and certain things, I do think that there is a bit of naivete with some immigrants, right? Because there's still financial illiteracy. And, I don't want to say tax benefits because I think that was a little too, politicky kind of like for me. So let me retract that. Not politics, but there are certain financial opportunities, right? We know that you can get a job, you can do, you know what I mean? Like we know that there's certain benefits, and obviously I'm not going to speak too heavily on this because, like I said, this is just the beginning of, my observations, and I look forward to learning more. Definitely not entirely knowledgeable in regards to like immigrant life and that transition. I've, heard people say certain things, but I haven't seen it for myself. I don't know too many immigrants where I've really been able to like sit and have that conversation, but I wonder, what is the story that is being sold? What is, because, there's just, so I don't know. I don't want to veer too far left into that. I think that honestly, that reference made me lose my train of thought. And I think we're going to wrap up here. But all in all, it's a lot, there's a lot on the line, and like I said, when you think about giftedness, it's never giftedness is something that is always, like, I'm reading this book, I'm reading books right now about giftedness and intelligence. That's been my most recent framework of study. And a lot of times it's referencing Susan and Larry, and it has absolutely no reference for African Americans, as if African American people weren't capable, weren't competent, right? We know this even with white Jesus in that structure, right? And the continual reference of Albert Einstein, so there's a lot there, right? There's a lot there. And when you realize that you have a lot of work to do on a individual level as well as a communal level, right? I was questioning whether or not, what was it about celebrities that made them, or entertainers, right, that made them not give back to their community. My first thought was, okay, possibly, considerably, right? Just because people have fame doesn't mean that they have money. So I thought, okay, maybe they're really not as wealthy as we think that they are. Maybe they just have all the glitz and glam and the influence, but they don't really have any money, right? And my second thought was, okay, maybe they're just not that intelligent. Maybe they just don't know what to do. They don't know how to start, giving back. They don't know how to create an organization and ensure that the funds actually get to the community. They don't know what causes. But then the third hypotheses I thought about, I said, okay, well, I actually think that they don't give back because they don't actually come from these communities, right? We know that in rap and entertainment, right, some of the most influential industries, especially as it pertains to African Americans, a lot of times the ghetto is glamorized, right? And I realized that if you've never lived in the ghetto, you would glamorize and go along with certain narratives, right? I think it was Rowdy Rich, who was, his father is a pastor, and he just completely never grew up in that life. He never lived in a ghetto a day in his life, and he's got the thuggish look going on the you know what I mean? He's got the thug thizzle, on the album cover, prayers to the trap god on the hits, like, and it's just like, it's this sensationalization, right? So it's like when you have a sensationalized version of the ghetto, right? One, you're probably afraid to go there, right? You've never been there. You're afraid to go there. And so then two, it's like you don't even know the needs of the community, right? I don't get why it's always a toy drive. I don't think we need toys. I don't think you need to be spending $1 million, $500,000 on toys. So I honestly think that all of those components actually play a role in the lack of, monetary and just, let me not say monetary, but obviously we're talking about money, but the lack of generosity, right, in terms of entertainers and celebrities and, so forth. Everybody in that category, everybody who's influential in that category, I think that all of those factors play a huge role as to why they don't give back, to Black communities. Because, and I think the third one is really hitting heavy for me. It's they never really lived there. They never really went through those things, You can couple that with intelligence, sure, but for the sake of the pod, we're going to stay, you know what I mean? Like, we're not going to be contradictory. But I do believe that there are a lot of people who've never lived in these communities. They've never been in these communities and never worked in these communities, And it's interesting, right? Because I think it works to their benefit, especially in terms of consumerism, right? Because you're reaching out to people who are in those communities. You're creating something enjoyable for them in those communities. You're making them glamorize their situation, but it's like you've never lived it. You've never been in that space, And when you really think about it, there's nobody who's self-made, right? And this is unfortunate, but we know that in this case, race is not always a proponent factor. And I do feel like as we're shifting gears in this podcast episode, I think we really could start another pod, but because I'm feeling like on fire right now, I just kind of want to keep going. But so first of all, being a Black person, you're always perceived, a deficit, right? Like you're always coming at zero. That has to be your story. That has to be the standard, even if that's not even the case, right? We know that with Blackness, like I said, you can't be gifted, godly, or genius. So a lot of times there's not really a lot of nuance we don't really get to exist in totality, right? There's a lot of I don't want to say spectrum, but we don't get to get down the spectrum, right? It's just one space, it's one lot, okay? And so you have that. And I think that it plays to it goes into their benefit, because it's like everyone thinks that you're from the ghetto anyway. Everybody thinks that you're poor anyway, right? And we know that I think they were saying that it's actually white kids who really love rap music, right? Like they go going ham in the Hamptons, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, we get it. So it kind of plays into this sensationalization. But I think even for those in the ghetto, it's like it plays into this glamorization of their situation, which goes back to my earlier reference, right? Of being in a space where it's like, this works for us. You know, we like, you know, okay, I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry, guys. So, okay, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, because that was a really good point of reference. I was looking around at my computer. Okay, anyway, but yeah, so I think that when you glamorize it, it makes it harder for people to really see what's going on and want to get out of it. And I think that this is also my biggest pushback with a lot of people who are always advocating for Black entertainment and Black entertainer industries, even if the music is defiling, you know, because the thing is this, like, they're telling a story and which then glorifies communities instead of putting them in a position to say, hey, this is not okay, right? Instead of putting them on the path of advocacy, instead of putting them on the path of, you know, we need to do something about this to get up out of these situations. We need to come together because we clearly see that entering into white institutions is going to come at a cost, right? And we know that judging by our representation in terms of how we look, right? Do we meet certain standards and so forth? Paper bag test, right? Everybody's not going to be able to get through that process seamlessly. Right. There are a lot of people who are going to go through some psychological, warring. And a lot of times we're not prepared for that. Right. Because of the lack of history. We don't know the ways in which white supremacy reigns and the hate that white people give. So we don't really know how to get in these situations and be in these institutions as the only Black. Right. And move strategically while maintaining our sense of self and our sense of health and well-being. Right. A lot of times the easiest way for a child to be in that space is to simply assimilate. So there's a lot there. But yeah, so this is why I get so frustrated, because it's like, instead of us, you know, being in a different space, but you know what? Ending the podcast episode, because quite frankly, I'm not going to veer too far left. This was great. So yes, I love this podcast. I love the column that I just wrote. Great work, beautiful work. I'm so grateful. Someone, you know what? I'm not even going to address it. Be blessed. Okay. I know you got something from this. I hope that this puts you in a space, in a frame of mind, to really think about certain things, you know, and really think about your own competencies, you know, think about your strengths. You know, when we look at people who start businesses and things like that, that's kind of where I was referencing to, like, when I lost my train of thought. You know, there's nobody who is self-made, right? When you look at white institutions and so forth, there's a lot of collateral and there's a lot of people whose hands been on deck, right? Black people built America, for example. So it's like nothing gets done by just one person. One man did not build America. Christopher Columbus did not bring his, you know what I mean? That's not what happened. So I think when you buy into, again, Western psychology, white European ideals and paradigms, it really puts you on this path to a very narrow path. And you don't believe that you can go and be and do and, you know, maybe take a different path, you know, and do something different. And a lot of times because of white supremacy, if it's not white stamped, if it's not white approved, if it's not something that white people did, then it doesn't count. It doesn't matter, right? If you didn't follow in their footsteps, in their trajectory, in their institutions and so forth, then it just doesn't matter. It never happened, you know, so you have to understand that as well. So intelligence is something that for African Americans, it's always going to be undermined. So you have to be sure of yourself. You know, I always say, take the time to read books. How are you going to tell me what I know when I read my book? You can't sit here and tell me that. You know what I mean? Books that you haven't read. I remember I had a professor who, you know, anthropology. And, you know, I asked a few questions about some of the things that she was teaching. And she felt like because she was a professor, this is the only way of being. This is the way of being. And this is the thing, too, with, you know, institutionalized learning. It doesn't teach you how to think for yourself. That's why you can go to a white church and sit in a pew and listen to a motivational speaker get up here and say whatever, right? Supposed pastor, you know, and he's talking about race and racism with such an insensitivity, and you're not moved. You don't think to challenge it. And it's not just you as a Black person, it's anybody, right? I've seen white pastors get up there and say all kind of stuff. Pastors in general, right? So you have to break free from religion. You know, don't just sit there and let someone talk to you about something, especially as we're moving into this space now where mega churches are sweeping the nation, right? You're going to have to make sure your spiritual house is in order, right? I believe that was definitely a word that me and my sister was talking about the word that's definitely a word that the Lord gave me. Like, make sure that your spiritual house is in order, period. Because we're moving, man. I'm telling you, it's definitely not necessarily white and black thing, right? But it's certainly a spiritual thing, right? We were definitely battling against some really evil spirits out here. So you have to really make sure your spiritual house is in order. I didn't mean to go gospel on y'all, but I'm just keeping it a buck. So you understand that, right? So it's something that's never questioned. It's not, and so she was upset essentially because I asked her a question, but it's like she felt like because we were in this authoritative, you know what I mean? Kind of like, you shut up and listen and I'm the professor and I know everything. We don't really get to have open dialogue, right? And Bell Hooks wrote about this in her book, Teaching to Transgress, just how, in the world of academia, we could all really benefit from having open-ended conversations and allowing a diverse body of thoughts to exist. And when we say diverse, I mean allowing Black people to have an opinion. When I say diverse, I mean really Black people being allowed to have an opinion in the classroom. But I want to end by saying this too. If you are a Black intellect, if you are someone who wants to step into your intelligence, you want to step into your giftedness, first of all, know that it comes from God. You're not going to get it by man. Quite frankly, me being in this space, pursuing a collegiate degree has taken quite considerable amount of time. And I can't say I've got much from it. I do think that there was a point in time where I think it was my third or fourth time, going back to school. And it's a long story. But I remember I was telling my father, I said, I think that college is making me dumb, and it was like such a bold statement, but in many ways it was, because here I am spending time with literature, right? A diverse body of literature, right? I'm reading things from Eckhart Tolle. I'm reading Oprah. I'm reading African-American literature. I'm reading self-help books, right? And I'm reading psychology, right? I'm just literally doing it all, right? I've got a New York sketchbook. I'm like learning about art, all these different things, especially in terms as it relates to studies, and, subjects, right? Y'all know, as Shada Shakur says, it's all the same, right? Music. I'm learning about sound objects, and so I'm like, I have this diverse body of knowledge, right? And here I am in this school where, the professors don't know everything and everything is by the textbook, and it's just like it's repetition, right? It's repetitive. It really doesn't allow you to think outside the box or color outside the lines. And so I said, okay, well, I don't think that my intelligence, right, my giftedness is going to exist in this realm because I cannot flow freely. It was very evident to me that I'm not going to be able to sit in this space and have an opinion and, really collaborate in that space, and obviously, of course, it's like nobody can validate my intelligence. Like, you don't know if I'm reading the books. You don't know if I'm, you know what I mean? And that's fine. That's fine. But at the end of the day, it's like, I am, so I just think for myself, it's like I had, it was profound. And I was like, I can't sit here and do this, and so we have that structure, right? We have that structure, and understand that you can rebuttal. You can refute, you can simply have an opinion, right? Everything doesn't need to lead to an argument, which I think, again, being in Western culture, European culture, everything that premises on a disagreement always results in death. So you have to understand white culture and the ways in which they operate in terms of psychology. It's different. It's not the same. They don't have the same. It's a difference in values. So when you hear things and people are like, oh, we're one and the same, we're human, sure, we're all Homo sapiens, but when you start talking about cultures, understand that Black culture is a culture. We are a different kind of people. We are not the same. You are not white. You are not white. It's not the same, right? We know that, medical apartheid, right? Black people have it's different body structure. Everything is different. You are a completely different person. So understand that. Understand what you're capable of, and understand that you don't always have to go through white institutions to get that time stamped, right? That doesn't mean don't go to college. And the reason why I can't completely debunk college, especially for our young people, is because, one, and I don't want to veer too far left, but we can't completely debunk college because we got to make sure if we're going to be talking about not going to college, the last time you read a book cannot be leaving your high school, right? You cannot be leaving with the only knowledge is Anne Frank. You see what I'm saying? So you have to understand that. And a lot of times general education and just, public education does not offer the Black studies and so forth, right? His children getting permission slips to learn about African American history. So you need to go above and beyond to really accumulate knowledge for yourself. And it's possible, right? It's possible. Nobody gets here overnight. But if you can make the time and schedule the time, and if you really want to be in this space and you really want to, tap in, you can do it. And understand too, there's different frameworks, right? There's different levels, so to speak, right? When we talk about being a Black scholar, we start talking about, collegiate studies and academia. Okay, yeah, I may be able to make the word sound a little bit fancy, but when I'm talking to somebody who's, in my community or whatever the case may be, you get what I'm saying? Even if I'm talking to someone who's younger than me, we saying the same thing. I'm just, hey, I'm just the vessel. You know what I mean? I got to put a little twist on it. You know what I mean? Make it sound good. You know what I mean? I'm in the space of, academia. So I got that, you know what I mean? We can just kind of, tailor the message, make it a little professional, but it's like we're saying the same thing. So don't ever think that you're without understanding of what's happened to you and what's going on with you. And, because you don't have a degree or because you didn't go into the field of academia or you're not in that space, right? You're very much aware. And yes, that was discrimination. Peace. No. I'm saying that was discrimination in terms of what you just went through, right? When you were at work and you were like, man, this person, yes, that was harassment. Yes, they just discriminated against you. Yes, that was racism. You know what I mean? Yes, that was white privilege being enacted. You know what I mean? Yes, you were a victim to that. Yes, that happened. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean when I say, yes, that was discrimination, right? So you don't need context. You don't need scholarly context to validate your experiences. And I also want to hit on this too before I close out. It's like, when we start talking about academia and, all of that, you have to understand that as a Black person, you're a little bit ahead of the curve. You know why? Well, because you have to survive, right? Well, white kids are being, in mansions and they're, plush communities and they're going to their soccer practice. You're out here working, learning how to deal with people, entrepreneurial, okay? You're getting it out the mud, okay? So you're a little bit ahead of the curve, okay? Understand that. While you're out here getting experience in the world, they're out there studying. So understand that, okay? That's the truth, right? When we out here inventing, practicing, doing what we got to do, right? They're out at college right now, reading books, letting someone talk to them for hours on end and with no questions asked. So, I'm just saying, we got to, hey, listen, we like to talk about it. Let's balance the scales here. Let's be real. Let's be real. So it's not the same. It's not the same. You're not going to be the same. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean that you're different. No, you're just not the same. While you're out here figuring out, okay, I may go to real estate. I'm going to figure out how to X, Y, and Z. They're out here reading real estate books, hours on end, eyes wide open, Xannies. You know what I mean? It's not the same. It's not the same. I'm at this point, I'm cutting up. All right. Peace. Love you guys. Bye.